2, 1.
Hello and welcome. Hello there. Welcome to Broadsheet and Telly. It's May the 4th going into May the 5th. My name is John Hopsters Ryan. On the panel this evening, Mike McGrath Bryan, our producer, Gavin Hennessy behind the purple thing is audio and visual effects. Johnny Keenan needs very little introduction. Mark Malone, who blogs at Sound Migration. Neil Curran, a safe pair of hands, and just back from being away. And Olga Cronin, who is going to go through, from Olga, who works at the sheet, is just going to go through tomorrow morning's on covers. Olga?
Okay. Hey everyone. So the Irish Times, if we just look at that first, the top story there along the top, anyway, at least by Conor Lally, the security and crime editor there, is about everyone. So Noreen O'Sullivan's appearance in PAC this morning, or this afternoon, and basically there were significant differences between what the director of HR, John Barrett, had to say about a meeting or a briefing that he had with Noreen O'Sullivan. Okay. Basically his understanding of what happened and what she understood of what happened. Their main story, though, is an inquiry into university accused of misconduct. This is an inquiry into the University of Limerick in relation to alleged bullying of staff and irregular expenses. Down there at the bottom, Trump scored legislative victory in Obamacare vote. Then in the Times, the British, the Irish.
Neil says not yet on that, by the way. But
a bigger part.
Neil says not yet on that.
Oh, not yet. Oh, yeah.
He's to get it through the Senate.
Okay, sorry. And then in the Times, the Irish edition, their splash by Ellen Coyne is Irish NHS would cost households $4,000 each year. So this is basically an attempt to create the Irish version of the NHS with free GP care, and a separation of private and public services will cost every household almost $4,000 a year in taxes or charges. This is what's been warned by Fine Gael. And there's also a picture of Enda Kenny with Justin Trudeau. He's in Canada at the moment, Enda Kenny. And if you look at the caption there, it says, the Taoiseach again declined to confirm the timeline of his planned departure from office. So that's going on. And that featured in the
Examiner, I think.
Examiner, yeah, on the front page, because apparently he wasn't very happy about being asked about that. So there's a piece there by Daniel McConnell and Elaine Loughlin. And just to read out their intro, an angry Enda Kenny lashed out at media questions over his pending departure at a frosty press conference in Montreal last night. I think he said something like, and they probably have the quote there, yeah, I can't believe actually that you have traveled this distance to ask a question like that. So that's going on.
Yeah.
And then the main story there, sugar tax cash won't be spent on health. There's also the story about housing. So by Stephen Rogers and Owen English, they're down in Cork. At least 1,400 vacant social houses are to be returned to productive use by the end of the year for homeless households and families on housing waiting lists. So this is supposed to be confirmed by Simon Coveney tomorrow. Some more housing statistics and figures. And then the Examiner kindly gave us this page 6 and 7. There's more, there's a report there on the Saudi Arabia vote. So you'll know about how Saudi Arabia, excuse me, was voted onto the UN Commission on the Status of Women, and basically 47 out of 54 countries voted for this, and we don't know whether Ireland voted or not, but there have been calls for Charlie Flanagan to state whether Ireland did vote for that or not.
And the NX Alliance are urging him to do that. And
that's right. And I think they said they're going to raise it in Cabinet next Tuesday. So we'll see what happens there. Like, it probably doesn't need, nobody needs me to probably talk about Saudi Arabia and its reputation for the treatment of women. But it has a guardianship system where women are basically live under the guardian of a male relative. So it basically means that in regards to travel or marrying or access to healthcare, they're not allowed to drive. It all goes through their male relative. But the ban on driving is universal. But and there's a piece there by Elaine Loughlin as well about the Eighth Amendment. Supposed to, I think Francis Fitzgerald wants it to take place as early as possible. I think she actually said this yesterday.
Yeah.
There's that. And then there's also a report there again by Elaine in regards to the prayer vote.
They added, was it 30 seconds of silence to the existing prayer?
Exactly, and they'll have to stand. It'll be mandatory now to stand. And some people actually raised the question, will it be mandatory? Because you see, I don't think it was mandatory before, as in it wasn't part of the law or the rules per se, but now it is. And there were some questions about whether the journalists will have to do that now or not. It'll be interesting though. I suppose we'll see what happens next Tuesday. Will people defy it?
I'm sure a lot of those journalists would like to. I mean, they seem very, certainly very angry with the Citizens Assembly. But the timing of the prayer vote is amazing. Like, right in the middle of the maternity hospital and
Citizens Assembly.
And Saudi Arabia vote. And anyway, so.
Absolutely. And then in the Guardian, it's basically Europe Council President Donald Tusk calling on Theresa May to show moderation and respect. This is after her comments yesterday, where she basically was claiming that Brussels was kind of meddling in the election, the UK election.
Sure.
There were quite strong comments on her part. At least I haven't heard something like that. This side of the water, anyway, for a while. The Independent.
That's
picture there of Jeremy Corbyn faces the swing seat.
Oh, sorry. It's more or less the kind of it's the sort of Brexit stuff. But can I just before we start, maybe Johnny would like to lead us in prayer.
Yeah.
One
love. Stand for one love. Peace and unity. That's my prayer, everyone. I heard Bree Smith last night on the radio when I was coming back from Dublin, and she was kind of very much against this. And I think as an act of defiance that she wasn't going to stand for it. So, fair play.
Sorry, Johnny, what was that?
Bree Smith, the People for Profit TV.
Yeah.
I heard her on the late debate on Radio 1 last night. And as much as I could make out, that she was very much against it,
Yes,
thing in the law. And I didn't know it was going to be on Tuesday. It was going to be the first the first gig. And from what I understood, that she was going to not adhere to it. She was going to sit down.
Catherine Murphy was also very against it yesterday. She made
well, it's ridiculous. It's populism again, John.
Yeah. I think it's interesting to say, just to note that, like, if you look at the vote, it was, I mean, it's not exactly interesting in the sense it's probably no surprise, but it was all Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael who voted for it, but there were several independents as well.
Mally McGrath, I think, was one.
Yeah, Sean Canny, Michael Collins, Michael Fitzmaurice, Noel Grealish, Michael Harty, Michael Lowry, Matthew McGrath, Kevin Boxer-Moran, Dennis Naughton, Maureen O'Sullivan, Thomas Pringle, and Shane Ross. And there were a couple of Labour in there as well. Sean Sherlock, Brendan Ryan.
What's the prayer? Do you know the...
Oh, I'll get that. I don't know it off the top of my head, but I'll get that.
That's a good question, John, actually, yeah.
Well,
I'm not advocating gambling. You could almost call it, couldn't you? Anything.
Sorry, Neil?
You could make money if you're a gambler. If the odds were good, because you always know what way Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil are going to vote in anything that's related to Vatican or Catholicism in this country.
Yeah.
We're talking about separation of church and state. You can't even get a vote as a building that's there to create just independent thinking. You have to conform. This is how strong the church is in this country.
Amazing. Do you know the referendum to take out the special place of the Catholic Church? You know, it was in late '72.
Yes.
was an 86% vote to remove the Catholic Church from its special place in the Constitution. That's 1952. I think what we're seeing this week, I certainly felt it from listening to the radio, is the disconnect between where the public figures are and broadcasters are, and where the public are. Frankly,
it's probably worth making a distinction, perhaps, as well, between like the idea of people having a particular faith.
Yeah.
And the actual institution that, the powerful institution that the Catholic Church has actually been in the Republic since its foundation, and so I don't really have a problem with the idea that people have a faith or they have a particular belief. That's all fair and grand. It's about recognizing that many people don't have a religious faith, and that shouldn't really have a role in how we organize our society politically, and I think that go on ahead. No, go on.
Sorry, what I was going to say is that I think that there's no voice for moderate Catholics on the radio or on the papers. The columns are all by very, very, very right-wing Catholics, hardline Catholics.
Yeah.
This morning there was a woman from Atheist Ireland up against
Ronan Mullen.
And Senator Ronan Mullen is extremely articulate, as you know, but and vicious, vicious, and also extreme. His views are extreme. They're more extreme than the woman from Atheist Ireland's views. She was moderate. She was temperate. She was kind of she was trying to seek some kind of middle ground. She understood that it wasn't a simple thing. It was very, very nuanced. And she was facing a guy who's basically, who regards this as murdering children. That's where they come from. That's their view. So,
I think.
Sorry, just to finish this. The false equivalents then are the fake equivalents of having this as balance.
Yeah.
To have balance for somebody like Ronan Mullen would be somebody who wants to destroy the church.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, but I think there's a bit where, so I can understand the defensiveness of those that have held power for decades and generations and see that waning away, and feel that there's a loss whenever there's actually a loss of the legitimacy of power, social power that the Catholic Church has had in terms of right across the range of social policies, as well as the broader framework of the philosophy, the philosophy or the sort of common sense by which we understand our society and how we relate to each other, So when you're arguing against people like Ronan Mullen, you're arguing against a particular type of fundamentalism, which is a fairly loaded term whenever it's used in this all-embracing way of describing the diversity within Islam, for example. But it is a fundamentalism. But it's a little bit like, I wonder, perhaps, is it a little bit like like animals trapped in a corner where the only space they see is to fight out, And so there are loads of moderate Catholics, or what Catholicism actually means to most people who would consider themselves Catholics is very different, perhaps, than what those loud voices and actors who proclaim to speak on behalf of what Irish Catholicism is in reality and in practice, and people commonly understand it themselves,
Sorry.
I think it's like a media formula. Sorry, I'll stop talking now.
Yeah.
It's like a media formula, and it's just they're kind of stuck in it. It's like we need to get two people who are completely opposed to each other, scream at each other, makes a headline, and it's tired, it's old, and it doesn't really work anymore, or it's lost its value to a large extent.
Yeah.
Because for the reason that you outlined, John, I would agree with you. I would.
Yeah, I mean, American Catholics, if you talk to them about these subjects, they're much less, I'm not talking about evangelicals in America, they're more nuanced, is really what I'm getting at. And I think that's the case with most Catholics in Ireland. And if 86%, as the census says, regard themselves as Catholic, I don't think many of them could identify with what Senator Mullen or Dave Quinn or any of the Iona Institute are saying. I mean, the Iona Institute, it seems to be a front for maybe, I don't know, Opus Dei or whatever. I mean, it's just who do they represent? Do they represent?
Yeah. Well, there was a good conversation last night, John, on Brendan O'Connor's Cutting Edge. Maria Steen, I think, was it, and Tommy Tiernan? And it was really engaging, and the camera angles were brilliant on it. You could see his face while she was talking, and her face while he was talking, and you could really tell a lot behind the eyes almost. It was very engaging. And once again, she came across with this condescending, higher moral arbiters that most of these, I don't know what her day-to-day job is, but she represents the Iona Institute. She did in that case anyway.
Yeah.
And just so condescending, and then just played the dead card. And very scary, very, very intimidating. And you can see, and I'll say it, I just feel that kind of psyche, that kind of mentality is very much across the public sector. We know better. You know, you can have your own little idea what liberalism is, but at the end of the day, we decide. That's the way I feel in the country that I live in.
But they can't believe
with that attitude.
They can't believe that it's just Punch and Judy. You know, it's like just this. It's so much more nuanced. I mean,
it is, and it's funny because I thought Alison O'Connor. I saw that as well, Johnny, and I thought Alison O'Connor, you know, she outlined that like, look, she wouldn't be. You know, she's pro the woman's choice. Let's say I won't go down that argument talking about the eighth if you don't want or whatever. But she basically was like, you know, she has children of her own, but she's not going to. She doesn't want to. She wouldn't want to enforce anyone else's decision on another woman. You know.
Yeah.
I thought Tommy Tiernan was very good as well, in that he was like, look, Mary or whatever, you're never going to change my view. It doesn't matter what you say. Like, my mind is made up. And he was kind of making the point that I don't think most Irish Catholics, you know, most 7-year-olds or 8-year-olds know what the Holy Communion means, what it is, you know. And, you know, he was quite funny, and he was, you know, like if you said to anyone, I'm eating the body of Christ, the child would, you know, freak out, you know, really eating the body of something. But he was, I thought he was very good in just kind of saying, look, you know, basically almost John, what you were saying a few weeks ago, like the arguments have been had, the debates have been had, and it's a case of, I think majority of Irish people don't want to, I think majority of Irish people respect other people's and faiths, and they just don't want to keep having these arguments.
Well, I thought the coverage of the Citizens' Assembly was just the kind of as if they'd made this huge mistake. You know, they democratically voted for this particular position. Why is this, and why are they being so maligned at the moment?
Well, I'd imagine because they come up with the wrong answer. You know, and I was one of the people that shared a view that the role of the Citizens' Assembly, separately from what its prescribed role was essentially a sort of social political mechanism by which the government could refuse to and push down the line, hopefully to the next government, which will probably be Fianna Fáil, I'd imagine, and not actually, you know, take on the responsibility of addressing reproductive rights for women in the country. And so, you know, many of us thought that the role, you know, the function of the Citizens' Assembly, quite aside from what decision it might come up with, that's its primary role was to just extend out this discussion so that the political choices in the Dáil would have been, you know, further pushed out. As it turned out, I was quite surprised by how the Citizens' Assembly actually voted, and it made me kind of rethink about processes of like research, deliberation, and people actually having an interest to sit down and tease out what the actual issues are. And when it was presented to people in a setting where all voices, and I mean voices that I would describe as you know, not having the human rights interest of women, not having a human rights genuine interest, and come from a quite fundamentalist perspective, a very dogmatic Catholic perspective, those voices were all presented, and the answers that came out was, well, actually, we want to live in a society where where people have reproductive choices, where the question of abortion is contextualized as an issue of health rather than a moralized issue from an institution like the Catholic Church. How that plays out, and actually the response was quite interesting in the sense that even you had RT commentators describing before elected representatives really came to it, saying the role of the government now is to water down the recommendations because they think that it's not palatable for the audience. It's really deeply paternalistic, yet realpolitik perspective on what is going to happen now. But yeah, and let someone else come in there now, I guess. But
please, it's very, very fascinating. Thank you, Mark. Thanks, Mark.
The Citizens Assembly, it's become the rope that the government has cut to hang themselves with, because the Citizens Assembly are now arguably the most educated people in the country on all aspects of abortion.
Besides women.
Besides women, but from hearing stories from all sides. So this has become this very dangerous mechanism for the government that, I mean, I think I was just as surprised as you, Mark, with how direct some of the findings, the recommendations they made. I think the government's going to have a very hard job arguing or watering it down. They're going to have a very hard job doing that. And I suspect we will never see the use of a citizens' assembly ever again as a result of this.
Unless they stop being afraid, unless they just kind of stop being afraid, because at what point will they let go of the past and the past electorate, the electorate that was the electorate that possibly when they first went into the Dáil 30 years ago, and hold hands with the electorate now,
But you mean, back in 2015, Enda Kenny explicitly stated there would be no referendum on abortion in the lifetime of his government, and then 2 years later we're at the point that we're at now. Whatever it is they're afraid of, and whatever it is that has pushed this along, I don't know. There's just, getting back to the original point about this vote in the Dáil, I couldn't believe the result of that vote on this poxy prayer and this poxy standing. It's a non-news story, yet it's a massive news story because, on Tuesday we will be reading in the papers that John Smith TD was kicked out of the Dáil today for not standing for a poxy prayer, and then tourists are going to read this in the newspaper and go, there you go, there's Ireland now. Someone was kicked out of the government buildings for not standing for a prayer. But they can't even agree. They can't even agree a dress code in the Dáil, but they can certainly agree what will happen if you don't stand up. Sorry, go on.
Can I ask the whole panel, how do you think we voted on the Saudi Arabia thing?
We voted with the beef.
Yeah.
Yeah, Mike?
To be quite honest, I have not been up on the whole Saudi Arabia deal, but it seems to me as though their silence is only incriminating them further. It seems to me that that keeping stum on the issue and keeping stum on repeated questioning seems to me as though they're trying to avoid letting unpalatable information out to the public on it. Honestly, I think their silence on it stinks, and I think that further pressing for questioning in the next couple of days is going to yield an answer we don't want. And I honestly think that all of this kick in the football down the road is literally a matter of, ask me no questions and I'll tell you no lies, which is scabby stuff, really, isn't it?
Well, the vote, is fairly meaningless. I mean, the whole thing is pretty meaningless. I imagine if there's a status of women committee and they're on it and we're on it, I guess. I mean, it can't be the greatest status of women committee ever.
You had Charlie Flanagan coming out today on radio on RT1, Music One, proclaiming that Ireland has a great track record in human rights, and particularly human rights for women, while simultaneously refusing to answer whether the Irish state supported Saudi Arabia's recommendation to this board, And I was kind of being flippant, but I'm serious. I think it's the interests of capital, the interests of power take precedent in this case. So Ireland's trade agreements with Saudi Arabia around beef, the close relationships with Simon Coveney and some of his family in a massive kind of industry. I think this stuff all plays out. Without making particular claims about particular monies, whatever. But I mean,
we're not suggesting. But Simon Coveney's brother is the head of Green Corps, and they are involved presumably in Saudi Arabia. Is that?
Yeah.
Say that he shouldn't be part of any decision regarding.
No, regardless of the actual individuals, I think it's about the practice of how power actually works at this levels. It's like the UK can talk about doesn't criticize Saudi Arabia and human rights because it has massive arms contracts with Saudi Arabia. You have US planes landing in Shannon that are going off to refuel Saudi planes while they bomb Yemen. Is part of that metric. So the idea that even the idea that this judgment was based on any kind of consideration of Saudi Arabia's human rights towards women or human rights more generally is kind of nonsense.
But I suppose the question,
the bit where they refuse to kind of answer kind of treats people as stupid. Like Flanagan's strongest point on the refusal to actually be transparent about what our supposed government and nation state actually did at that level, the strongest argument was this is tradition. Traditionally, we don't say. This is tradition. It's not it's not because you can't say. It's not because it's illegal or that it goes against any kind of written down rules within the UN itself. It's literally, we're not going to tell you.
Yeah, I gather. I gather Belgium said that they voted and they're ashamed that they voted.
Yeah.
I don't know who voted then on their behalf, but it seems that they've got a buyer's remorse or something. But presumably, we will go through this process tomorrow at some point. We will apologise also, and I don't know.
There's my hand.
Friday afternoon. Friday afternoon.
See, that is scary. Friday afternoon's extra.
Okay.
So Mark, I wanted to go back to you. Having monopolised the last 15 minutes, I want you to monopolise some more.
Sorry, well, I mean, just other people to.
No, I'm joking. But you were at the Joan Burton, or rather the Joslin trial this week. You attended on Tuesday.
Yeah, I was there Tuesday morning and part of Tuesday lunchtime. I think that was Joan Burton was up as a witness, former Taoiseach, and the case is around charges of false imprisonment against Joan Burton and her advisor Karen O'Connell, arising from a protest, I guess, when she was out opening or celebrating a graduation ceremony in Jobstown around on Cusson Adult Education. Yeah, I mean, where do you start with?
Do you know what I was actually going to ask, Mark, just to get away from the actual case itself, but just looking at the operation from the helicopter view of the scene. Now, this is there's no reflection on whatever ordeal Joan Burton went through, but looking at what was happening there, it seemed that. Well, I mean, it just seemed very strange, didn't it? I mean,
Well, I mean, yes, like the footage from the helicopter suggests that there was a route out for the car, the second vehicle that Joan and Karen were taken to. It seemed like there was a possibility of reversing out of there because there was a sit down thing in front of the car. The Garda pilot actually recognised that and said that, and that was shown in court, where he was describing the slow move forward of the car. And he said something like, we've got 100 yards to go, less than 50 yards to go. People are dispersing. They could have made the call to reverse out, but they didn't seem to want to do that.
The quote, his exact words were, the quote was, I beg your pardon, the computer just froze there. It's fairly dispersed. She's making a good bit of progress. She's only another 100 meters, not even 50 meters from the Tala bypass. There's no pushing or shoving or anything. The public order unit moved in there for a minute and there was a bit, and they seem to have left them march ahead of their banner. Like the Jeep could have went backwards ages ago, and I couldn't hear the person, but it was inaudible. The Jeep could have went backwards ages ago, but did not want to do that. Someone did not want to do that. There's no hassle really. And then later he said, no, she's still not out. Could be another 20 minutes or half an hour anyway.
Okay. I mean, Mark, what does that tell you? I mean,
well, I mean, it would suggest that it looks like it's quite possible that there's charges of false imprisonment, quite serious charges of false imprisonment against 7 individuals, arising from the basis of an operational call on the ground. I think that's really problematic. Stepping back at it and looking at it from a sort of through, I guess, a kind of political lens, perhaps. I mean, I think it's relatively common practice for charges to be pressed against people as a matter of putting manners on movements of social dissent. That was certainly common practice and recognised practice in Rossport, where people would be dragged through the courts. And the rationale for that was not to find a guilty plea, but which rather to take people out of action, to demonstrate what happens if people get involved in sort of street political dissent, and kind of, at quite a remove from any of the sort of, how we would commonly understand what, natural justice or court justice is about. It's a tool of repression, I guess,
Well, okay. Let's not go into the trial. I mean, it's we've allowed a certain amount of comment on the site because it's contemporaneous. Both sides have been very well represented in terms of people are disgusted with what they're hearing about Ms. Burton's ordeal, but they're also somewhat taken back by some of the conflicting evidence regarding.
I mean, I think a large part of a large part of the distance is the idea that a sit-down protest, which is a fairly common tactic that's used everywhere. I mean, certainly I've been involved in mobilizations that were about shutting down meetings, shutting down summits that included, thousands of people at a particular time. The idea that you're going to go, well, there's a little bit of it goes with the territory if the policies that you're imposing are imposing massive hurt that are part of a process of deepening inequality. And actually that in some ways seeking to kind of criminalize popular dissent, direct actions, it has always been part of the toolkit, I guess, of the state and capital in terms of pushing back against social movements as they express bits of discontent. I think everyone's quite surprised by the fact that charges of false imprisonment were brought, and they're quite serious. They come with quite serious sentences,
Yes, of course.
So, and that's not in any way, and I'll be quite straight up about it. I think that for some of the individuals that are involved, they may well have been and probably were traumatized by those particular events. But that's, many of us have been traumatized by the experiences of living, in Ireland post the Great Recession. Many of us have been traumatized by 64 billion worth of debt being imposed on our shoulders whilst bankers walked free. And the idea that there's this sort of, a very overused word, but privileging some people's sort of discomfort around the realities of what's going on in our society, whilst tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of us lived with the ongoing precarity, insecurity, the sort of futurized debt that's built upon our lives. Okay. And yet somehow this gets stilled into a particular court case. It just doesn't sit very well, and it's actually a describer of that deep structural inequality, I think, as well.
Yeah, well,
I nailed it there, John. I think it's the last thing we have as a society, as a people, is the defiance in relation to protest. And outside of this, whatever, but the situation in Jobstown and around Ireland at that time was that water meters weren't going to go in, and they were defiant that they were. And then you put into who was responsible for it, who got the contract, the same guy that had to pay €1 billion in compensation this week. So, as was said by Olga and Mark and Neil as well, we're informed now. You can give us the RT bias side of it, but there is 100 other sources that we can tap into. And you just have to look at what Vera Toomey go through there today. She had to have her own sit-down protest because no one seems to be listening to her. She got 30 politicians, I think, definitely 30 people that work inside Leicester House to approach Simon Harris on her behalf to have a cup of tea with her and to tell her, listen, there is something happening, by the way. But he refused quite blankly because this is their mentality. They can keep kicking it down the road. And I don't know why we can't talk about the Jobestown case when it's all over Facebook. So either or.
I mean, I don't know. I just feel maybe we.
But it's a joke.
Maybe we don't need to add to the stuff that's been said. Maybe we just take a different angle, like in terms of.
But the dregs of society. When someone says that, completely writing off a whole working class part of Dublin, that just goes to show the elitism that is in the capital alone. Yeah. How much they consider these people.
Yeah, totally, Johnny. I'm not trying to fall out with you or anything, but what I'm trying to say is that this could be, for instance, in a reasonable defense that she was so traumatized that she was reduced to this kind of language. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, but if you want to continue with that video, there was no trauma in it to anyone who was looking at it. She was calculated. Okay, so I can't, right?
Yeah. No.
She was calculating what she said, John. Go on social media now and get them to say there's no one looking after the kids. Just deflect the situation. That's why he basically said, listen, I don't know what Joan Burton thinks. Does everyone need to be inside with underneath a blanket with an iPad? When I was 8 or 9, like we were running around through fields. The communities looked after each other. It just goes to show her mentality. And there was no Labour banner at May Day last Monday in Dublin. And Jim Larkin and James Connolly, she's got some fucking cheek, man. She really has.
Okay, well,
that's unbelievable.
I think like there's part of what Johnny's saying is like there are those that profess to represent the working class, the dispossessed, those of us that are precarious, and those and organisations that pretend to speak to that when actually they're being part of the machinations of the state in that have actually made our situations worse. And I do think that there's a bit where I think perhaps rather than speaking to Joan Burton particularly, that there is a sort of a disdain that's held for ordinary, for working poor, for ordinary poor people. And there's a massive disdain in Ireland for uppity working class people. That really gets up the noses because they really don't like it whenever people start, we won the water tax, we beat the water tax. They really don't like that shit, and there's a particular disdain then that's held for those of us on the left that, don't respect respectability for respectability's sake. That actually, that people that kind of go, actually our injustices, the stuff that's foisted onto us, we're just not going to accept that. We're going to push back. And that's not to say that like street mobilizations are the only way to do that. There are many ways to do that. But I think it's very clear that whenever people organize to kind of push back, to be involved in popular education, to talk about stuff out loud, and to be unapologetic about that, there's a particular disdain that's held to, those segments of population. They become demonized, sought to be criminalized. Listening to the conversation around the water tax over the last couple of years in the Dáil, we're like, we're kind of aligned to ISIS, we're aligned to terrorists, we're aligned to whatever, total hyperbole, which speaks to the actual absence of any kind of coherent narrative on the right.
The same rhetoric that was associated with the anti-war protest in 2003, man. Anti-American. Because we didn't want people to be killed in the Middle East.
Can I get Neil to come in here? Neil?
Yeah. I could. My eyes roll at this whole thing. I just, it's an ongoing court case anyway. But I think there's a lot of speculation about, how traumatized she was and wasn't, and it's very easy for us to speculate from the sideline. We're traditionally we haven't been great as a country at protesting, and that's changed dramatically in the past few years. I don't know. I'd really much more to say on poor old Joni and her issue, I'm afraid.
Just in terms of the protest, you had, it was a 3-4 year campaign, the Water Charges campaign. It was incredibly peaceful. In fact, the only social media stuff that I've seen real violence, like actual violence, was. If you remember, after one of the marches, that car mounted a pavement,
yeah,
and drove through a crowd of people, and I mean that was attempted. I mean, it was attempted manslaughter or something. What the hell? I mean, he was.
Who was driving the car?
Well, it was clearly a security service. It was an off-duty.
Okay, yeah.
It was in Broadbridge, I think, under Broadbridge in Dublin.
Yeah.
Okay, right.
But he just drove through these people, and it was absolutely shocking, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Really shocking. But we never heard any more about it, or there was no one.
Well, I mean, there's loads of stuff around that water tax stuff. Like, you know, we were involved in kind of blockading water meters going in Stonybatter. We had like private security companies coming around and filming us, like, you know, first thing in the morning with cameras right in our face. And this is like, hold on, this is a state project. Yet suddenly there's the police. And then there's like these private contractors that are coming in filming. We're not really sure who they were providing evidence to or what they were filming for themselves, you know? Yeah. And I mean, the thing was, like, the water tax movement was really peaceful, but it was also really militant. Like, so people physically put their bodies in spaces to stop diggers pulling up the fronts of our houses and our streets and saying, no, these aren't going in here. People went out at nighttime and took out water meters, and they're still doing it, taking out water meters after they went in. So it was like simultaneously peaceful yet quite militant. I think that's sorry, go on.
Sorry, no, I was just going to say, it also, one of the things I noticed in a lot of stories and videos we saw was we saw this wave of people educating themselves on the right to protest and what that means. I'm sure we've all got anecdotal stories about people quoting law back to the guards and the guards eventually walking away. And I think one of the things that, you know, as well with the guards, as I know a few stories myself and a few things that I witnessed, the guards themselves as well were in the same boat as the rest of us when it came to paying water charges, and yet had to police this farce of a setup. But yeah, it definitely, you know, people started to educate themselves on what our rights are in protesting, and how we should be addressing that. And the state definitely was prepared for that in any shape or form, because again, we're not a nation that protests en masse.
Yeah, I have to say, I suppose you said militant, and it was all verbal around, but I found the whole water charges thing amazingly peaceful.
I think those two things sit beside each other. I think it's really important to say it's entirely possible and essential, I think, to be militant and yet not be, you know, violent. What is, you know, we talk about what's violent, what's not violent, but I think, like, tactics of civil disobedience, you know, tactics of saying, you know, actually this is our community, we don't want this happening here, and if you want to make it happen, you're going to have to come and push at us, you know. I think there's specifics around the fact that water meters had to be installed that led to, you know, the specifics around that particular policy that in and of itself facilitated and enabled communities to actually be empowered to get involved with this stuff. I also think there's a bit of a nexus around our ability to share what we were doing, and as Neil talked about, like, kind of educating each other and showing, you know, solidarity and gaining confidence from the fact that we could see this was happening in many places. I think that's all in that mix, you know, and hopefully, like, lots of that learning moves on into different kind of spaces, I guess, as well, you know. But it is that bit of not being afraid to say that we're in opposition to this stuff, and we are fighting for something a lot better and a lot more honest, fair, truer, and just than the social policies that have been put.
I think like you call yourself left wing, don't you, Mark? I mean, you say I'm a left wing and Marxist or whatever. I mean, I'd be closer to anarchist than anything else. I guess that would be my, you know, personal, I guess, trajectory, you know. So that's not a left and a right. Would you
it's definitely left. It's definitely left, but it definitely has an orientation to authority, which is like, authority needs to really justify itself before it imposes, or that it gets respect in the sense that it imposes, you know, laws or policies upon us, you know. But I mean, rather than, you know, looking into the finer details of anarchism, but I mean, I think there's a bit where I take seriously that the nation state and capital in forms that they exist currently now are deeply problematic if you take seriously the idea of an egalitarian society where we recognize both structural oppressions right now, the possibility of dealing with ecological collapse and living on a planet of finite resources, and actually the notion that people are intelligent, creative human beings, and that we have the capacity to self-organize our communities, our workplaces, and how we live in ways that reflect values of our collective common good, respect for each other, go back to Johnny, peace, love, respect, and unity, that those things that we take really seriously, and that economics should be subordinate to those aims rather than an a prior thing that we happen to be born into and then are subjugated by that.
Okay, well, it's fascinating. Neil, would you regard yourself as left or right?
No, I don't like labels, John.
Well, exactly.
I tend to kind of, I'd be more on the left side for sure. But if you really want to put a gun to my head, but I'd have varying views on topics that may not necessarily align to either side. There's just this big, and this is not in any way disrespectful to anyone on the panel, there's this big thing at the moment because of the extremism we're seeing on the right side in politics. There's a big push for putting labels on campaigns and things like that, which I don't think is necessarily healthy either. That's just my view on it. Extremism in anything is unhealthy, be it you're a militant Christian, militant atheist or whatever. But putting labels then, I don't think is necessarily healthy, because nothing in life is necessarily black or white. It's all a bit grey.
Johnny, I'm gonna guess you regard yourself as left wing.
Yeah, it's easy to kind of jump in, and I like Neil. I'm not in love with tags, but yeah, I am. Everything I agree with, like the left parties have these all the campaigns I follow, all the protests. It's all about the people, John. I don't know left and right in relation to Marxism and capitalism. Yeah. I can only just talk about my experience in this country. Yeah. I'm against conservative Catholic parties like Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil. I support left-wing ideas like people for profit. And instead of just being a campaigner, I go and listen to these people. I try to go to Fianna Fáil meetings, but it's just, it's ridiculous. I'm not in that mindset. They don't speak the ideas that I think should be flourishing, and liberalism is what I'm really into, Yeah. And I'm scared that Ireland is becoming a nanny state, and we were just talking earlier on in relation to conservative Catholicism is very right-wing. Enda Kenny's Fine Gael is very much associated with a very strong Christian right-wing party in Europe.
Yeah.
And the Vatican is the elephant in the room here. Who's responsible for what's going on in Leinster House? It all goes back to the Vatican. They're getting ready for the Pope next year. It's all keeping it going, keeping us like mushrooms, feeding us shit, Yeah. And well, the thing is, and I don't mean to be flippant about it, but if we actually were at a day of maybe taking mushrooms, we could see everything. Squeegee the third eye, and that should be almost a rite of passage when you do the leaving cert. Here's a few mushrooms, lads. Don't be wasting your fucking time with that alcohol. And it would really open up people. That's a liberal society, John. I'm not being flippant, as I say.
No.
Legalize for medicinal purpose, for recreational purposes. Let's the economy grow and all this, and we need to be the separation between church and state. And I really appreciate Mark in relation to the first time I shared the panel with him. And the anarchy association in relation to the mindset, the mainstream media would have you believe it. These guys are just interested in breaking up everything, getting pissed. But an anarchist is the most lateral a general thinker you could possibly have, and it's reflected there in Mark's comments anytime he's been on the panel.
Yeah.
So I'd like to say a fair play to them, yeah.
Yeah, they're badly named or something, because I remember having a row with an anarchist who, we're not anarchists, really,
The Sex Pistols' fault.
We're far from anarchists.
Yeah, it's the Sex Pistols.
Yeah. So we have the...
We have to ask Olga, is he left or right?
Sorry, Olga.
No, you're okay. I think I'd be definitely left, but I wouldn't like to put myself in a label either. I certainly don't follow any party. I'm not a member of any party. Never have been. And I suppose with journalism, whatever, that's kind of like a thing. But I think I'd like to think that I think of in fairness, like I consider the fairness of something, or the fairness of a situation, or the fairness of whatever party stance is on something. I don't think there, like, we've probably talked about this to death, but I don't think there really is a left and right divide in Ireland. I don't think the left and right divide is very real anyway, in a lot of ways. So I think, like, as you said, I think sometimes it is. I think, Mark, you were saying that these extremes are kind of set up, or possibly Neil, you said that these extremes are set up and they don't really serve anyone, you know. And I don't think they do, and I don't think they really represent people either.
No,
you know?
no. Well, I want to say that we've had some commentators have said, you know, we need more balance on Broadsheet on the Telly, you know. And what I said is that, like, all these people are just the people who, like, Johnny Neal, you know, that it just became it was organic. And if there were any people who nobody was asked what your political views were, but I happen to think that, and maybe just in the last year and a half, 2 years, we've become a lot more progressive. You know, I feel that. I feel there's a genuine sense, but it's not being reflected by anybody, by the television, by RT.
But it's almost like the politicians and the media are reflecting each other, and they're kind of keeping the status between themselves. It's like almost like pass the parcel between two entities, you know, just reflect. And, you know, it's perfect. Today's prayer vote was quite representative of that, I felt. So, sorry.
Like, I'm, I guess, similarly, like, I totally get the resistance that people have of being, you know, boxed in under labels. And I think you know, sometimes labels can be like super reductive and rob people of kind of agency or sense of self themselves. I do think, though, it's worth looking at the broader political context, both historically and where we're at now, in the sense that, like, right-wing economics has brought the Great Recession, which has caused the deaths of tens of thousands of people. This, you know, the historical role of stuff like imperialism, occupation, the role that struggles between capital and workers is left or right. So I'm slightly concerned sometimes that actually there's the absence of, or the fear of labels, or the fear of being labeled, or the fear of pronouncing oneself as something or other. Masks perhaps a broader, I'm honestly not trying to be in any way kind of patronizing or smart ass here, but masks a sort of the fact that, like, for many of us, we're still grasping with, like, how the fuck does the world work? How does the world got to the space that it's in? You know, and I'm looking at the sort of the histories of on this island or across the world, like the roles that power over and power under, what that actually means. And for me, like, the idea of being left wing is actually about notions of egalitarianism, but that has to stand up in evidence as understood. You have to be able to back that up, you know. Yeah. And I think looking at like where right wing politics is now, that's the rise of the far right. That's the rise of othering, in relation to the fact that capitalism, as it actually worked, has seen tens of thousands of us put out of work and live in precarity. You know, and I'm conscious of just going on a political rant here. But I think there's a bit of, like, so the role of kind of popular education, the role of us thinking through, well, what really matters to us as human beings in the short time that we have on this planet, and what do the policies that those that have power, what does that actually mean? How does that interact with those kind of values? And I think it is about actually us having conversations with each other without, maybe fucking dickheads like me proselytizing too much, but honestly, like, ranting on. It's not like I don't come to this stuff for the Bible of truth, and I'm not interested in saying, you have to believe what I think, and therefore, if you believe what I think, then you've got the right thing, and then we're all going to work out. It's not about that. Yeah. It's not about that, But
no, I appreciate it. In fact, you're not doing anything but proselytize. I mean, you're setting your stall out very nicely, and
yeah.
Sorry, go on.
No, but I can rant properly in a pub. But I think generally, what I mean is like let's look at the getting and teasing apart the bump of like a lot of how mainstream media represents and the sort of fluff around, for example, the questions around, for example, abortion. It was very clear when there was a deliberative process in the Citizens' Assembly where people were presented in a space that allowed conversation, reflection, discussion.
Yeah.
That some good things came out of that, and I firmly believe that, like, I think we're all intelligent, caring human beings. I don't think there's a need for a sort of a class of people that are professional politicians that to a large degree have come through, family dynasties and whatever else as well. It's like how we think about through this stuff means that we all should be involved in deliberative processes that result in social policies that seek to maximize good for us all. And I don't think that as an intelligent, species, that's beyond our ken at all. It's about how do we actually get to that as well.
Mike,
Yeah.
what are the kids in the street saying?
Speaking as a kid on the street myself and my experience, I've always been to the.
Mike, are you left or right?
I'm left. I've always been variantly left. I grew up in North Cork in the early 1990s. Hang on, I'm getting a slight echo on myself. Again, growing up in North Cork in the early 1990s, it was very much Labour country, so that kind of value was always there to an extent. And obviously, being younger, a personality around the place like Joe Sherlock that presented himself, as far as any of us knew, that Labour were very worker friendly. Obviously, the last government has proven otherwise. That Labour is very much a kind of a pet poodle of the right in Ireland.
So you're like
Max.
You're from a Labour family then, effectively, are you?
Labour family. I'm from a family that voted whatever way the wind blew. There wasn't a great political background, but I will say that the local politicians were personalities that everybody was aware of. I will say that my own political awakening came obviously with the economic crash. Being from a rural working class area, there was always a distrust of Fianna Fáil. There was always a distrust of Fine Gael, but it was generally slathered in the same kind of antipathy toward all politicians. It wasn't until we kind of saw the grand effect of the bailout, bank guarantee crash, etc., and we saw, number one, Fianna Fáil's inability to react to the crisis in a manner that was fair or even-handed. That was simply just kind of handing everything over on a plate to the people that had brought the crash about in the first place. And then Fine Gael, and in particular Labour. And I had been a Labour voter up until the age of about 18. Well, you start voting at 18. I had been a Labour supporter through my teens, and then had voted for Labour the first couple of times around. It was a particular stab in the back to my own naive self, and Mark's remarks on left versus right. A lot of people are, again, very, and as is their right to be so, very reticent about being labelled. But by that same token, I see what people would typically guarantee as the left and as the right, and we've seen the disastrous policy of the last 10 years resulting as a result of having the centre right and its various buffers and so on and so forth in power. And we've seen the logical conclusion of them not work for people. We've seen the logical conclusion of neoliberal economics resulting in displacement, in precarity, in suicide, and in immigration. And it's not a matter of I'm gonna pace myself as one particular color. I'm not gonna pace myself as anything here, but it's simply what works and what doesn't. Fucking functioning society works, empathy works, egalitarianism works. All of this whole thing. The right, and in particular, what their policies have led to, and the race to the bottom which is it's entirely unworkable. Again, precarity, 0-hour contracts, blah blah blah. It's all to the bottom, and I think that's very much driven by ideology of strong and the Tories this week have keep throwing out strong and stable leadership, strong and stable. Trump very much coming to the fore as a strong leader, quote unquote, presenting himself as a strong man. The right-wing ideology as presenting strength as a virtue above community does not appeal to me at all. For that reason, I would, and with apologies for the ramble, present myself very strongly.
Well, I have to say that I mean, we're overrepresented with kind of voices from the left, but there are none.
Sounded like an echo chamber, John. All right.
No,
you're going to have to balance it out. Can't sit in the fence, John.
Well, this is it. I mean, do you contrive a situation where you got some kind of guy who's just a nihilist and just saying?
No, that's the point. That's what's not working. That's what's not. That's the problem.
Yeah.
Unless if that's what people want, but that that's like anyone is out, But it's not what we. Is it what we want? Is it really what we want?
Anyway, sorry, Mark. Please.
No, but it is like if you look at the broader media landscape, it's like it's not balanced at all. So the left views are deeply not even underrepresented, but persistently misrepresented in the media landscape in Ireland. And that stands aside from the good work of particular journalists or whatever else as well. But it's like the idea that capital doesn't have a voice and is misrepresented or underrepresented. We wouldn't think seconds about that, and it is the bit of like, I think if we're interested in media just being a kind of a talking shop, then go for balance. But if we take the idea that media workers or journalists play a role in sort of speaking truth to power, being involved in transformatory movements that enable and facilitate more egalitarian, or the erosion of oppressions, the erosions of inequality, I don't see a problem in that. I would have a problem with a singularly left dogmatic media echo chamber that was like a Bible of truth and just talked to itself and wasn't curious about the world around it and curious about how we work. But
well, I mean, I
John, what's going to say what Broadsheet, the cynics, God forbid.
Yeah.
If there is a God. The lefty loonies there, the echo chamber. I can almost see them writing it now.
Yeah, the right.
So I would say, come on, lads, get on. I won't call them out, but they know who they are. You do the call out every week. You're looking for contributors. So obviously we've all said that we're leaning left, for want of a better term. So we need to have these exchanges. We need to have these conversations, rows, rants, whatever.
Conversations.
Do, but I would describe myself as sort of alt-prog.
that was a music scene in the 70s. No?
It's actually Bodger's favorite music as well. Ironically, I would be like I pick and choose. I'm not like I'm all over the shop really. So I don't know what party. We need a pirate party of some kind. Why doesn't the Citizens Assembly form its own party?
But why need parties at all? Actually, let's have lots of spaces of like popular deliberation. Spaces where people actually sit down and thrash through the issues on the basis of evidence and values that are open. Yeah. Sorry, Olga.
No, Mark, I completely agree with you. I think it's a really, really valid point, a really valuable point. Like, I think it was Ellen Coyne in the Times of Ireland. I think she did a lot of great work on the Citizens Assembly. She went to every meeting, etc. And I think it was her who made the point that the difference as the weekends went on, in the sense of the questions that were being asked from the people who were becoming educated, if you like, over these meetings and over these talks and everything, it was quite telling. Like, she was basically saying it was quite telling as to how they're, how kind of just you could see how things were changing for them. So it is. I think it is really. It could be something that could be used, and it's just a matter of trusting that then. And trusting, and the government trusting, and the media trusting people who are like the electorate, really,
Yeah.
Well,
but the one thing.
Sorry, Neil, go on.
There is an assumption, and you can kind of see it from people like ourselves on this panel, and no disrespect again to anyone. There's an assumption that everyone cares and wants to be involved, and frankly, I don't think most people just want to get on with their life, and that's why we have this system where we vote for people to represent us. And Again, Mark, just to take anarchy, because I was educated on that when I was younger by a friend who was claimed to be a staunch anarchist, which I thought was a Sex Pistol reference to someone who had punk hair and just broke plates. But it's all sounds very idyllic. And with all due respect to you, Mark, with some of the things you were saying there, I never heard of these words before, and it's not because ignorance. It's because it's just something that had never. I don't get that much involved in things like that, and I do have an interest in politics and economics to a certain point. But there's a lot of people in my network that just don't give a shit about politics beyond the front page of whatever paper they read the sports section in. And I think the key thing though that has been said is balance. It's finding the right balance. And we are seeing this change, this shift in Ireland, that people are raising their head above, above the line, whatever metaphor we want to use, to kind of show an interest in making a change. But I think we have a long way to go, and I don't think there's an ideal label for what it is that we will become or we want to be. But we'll take a positive step forward. But there is going to be, I think, a fair percentage of the population that possibly have no interest in. Even this discussion.
Yeah, and God forbid, but Neil, on that conciliatory note, we'll say goodnight from Mark Malone, Neil Curran, the great Johnny Keenan, Mike McGrath, Brian, our producer, Gavin Hennessy behind the purple ident, who did audio and visual effects tonight, and Olga Cronin, who looked up the papers and is with Broadsheet. And we'll see you tomorrow. Our next Thursday. Okay. We'll see you on the side, hopefully. Good night.
I just fixed on broadcast.